Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be creating 3 Christmas cards using the Uniquely Creative's Holly Jolly Christmas paper range. I'm using a 6x6 paper pad. Each of my card bases are 5 inches square. So I cut some 240 GSM cardstock, 5 inches by 10 inches, and then I used my scoreboard to score it at 5 inches, folded it in halves, creating my white card bases measuring 5 inches square. So we'll start with this card first. I selected a red plaid pattern paper from the pack and I trimmed that down so that it was 4 3/4 inches square. I hadn't really worked out what I was going to do with this card, so I trimmed this down so that it was a 1/2 inch frame. That way I could save the piece of pattern paper from the middle in case I wanted to use it on another part of the card. I'm going to cut a piece of white cardstock that will sit on top of my red frame. This cardstock will be 4 1/2 inches square. Time now to ink the edges of my pattern paper and my white cardstock. To add a little bit of interest to my 4 1/2 inch piece of white cardstock, I get my scoreboard and I score, starting from one edge, every 1/8 of an inch. And I do that 8 times, so I end up at about an inch or an inch and 1/8. It's just like a bit of embossing really. Instead of using an embossing folder, it just puts a few lines onto your cardstock. I used double-sided tape to attach that to my red frame. I had a look around and found this Coordinations Rouge paper or plain cardstock, and I'm going to use that to go with this card. I'm going to use my Spellbinders Classic Scallop Circles Large, the second smallest one in the set, and that is about 2 1/8 inches wide, and cut 2 circles to go behind 2 of the tags that I took out of the Creative Cuts pack. I ink around the edge of both the tag and the scallop circles and then use double-sided tape to attach the tags on top of the scallop circles so that just a little bit of the scallop is showing out above the tags. I use a hole punch to put the holes back through the red cardstock, and then I thread a double layer of white crochet cotton through each of the tags. I've chosen this red Merry Christmas label from the Creative Cuts to be my sentiment. Before I attach my tags to my card front, I add a couple of layers of scrap chipboard to the back of them so they sit a little higher than the back of the card. I ink around the outside of my sentiment and then put the brads through the holes that are already in the label, so that when I attach it to the card, the brads will not be poking through into the inside of the card. Now I have all of my elements assembled, I'm going to go ahead and start to put everything together. I'm going to attach my background panel to the card front, and then I'll attach my embellishments on top of that. To add a little bit of sparkle to my card, I'm going to use 3 of these Picket fence sequins. They're called Moonshine, they're clear. And I'm just going to add 3 onto my label, my sentiment, 3 at the top and 3 at the top right and 3 at the bottom left. I used my Silhouette Pick Me Up tool and some liquid glue to attach the sequins to the label. And that completes our first card for today. On to card number 2 now. To start, I cut a piece of the same red cardstock that I used on the previous card, the Rouge. I cut that to 4 3/4 inches square. I chose this piece of pattern paper that has like a wreath on it, and I trimmed that down, trying to keep the wreath in the centre of the pattern paper. So I trimmed this down and it ended up being 4 inches square. To ensure that I got the centre of the pattern, or kept as much pattern as I could, I marked the centre of both sides and then I cut out from that centre. So I cut 2 inches on each side of that centre mark. I cut a piece of gold mirror card, 4 3/8 of an inch square, to go between those 2 layers. I'm going to ink around the edge of each of my layers and attach my gold mirror card to my red cardstock. I've used my Memory Box Snowflake Ornament die to cut one snowflake ornament from gold cardstock. The cardstock that I cut the ornament from has got sticky at the back, so that is going to make it very easy for me to attach this bauble to my card front. I just peel the back layer off. Before I attach the ornament to the front of the pattern paper, I'm going to run a line of metallic string from where the bauble is going to hang to the back of the pattern paper. Once I have that in place, I then attach my ornament on top. I used sellotape to attach that string to the back of the pattern paper, and then I used some liquid glue to attach the pattern paper to the gold mirror card. I've fussy cut several poinsettias and holly leaves from the pattern paper, and now I'm going to use my flower shaping tool just to press down into the middle of the bigger flowers that have got the leaves and holly around them, just to give them a shape and let them stand up from the front of my card. This doesn't take very long, but it makes a big difference to the appearance of the card. Now I'm going to play around with positioning my poinsettias onto my card. I'm going to follow the shape of the wreath, so the wreath is going to be like a background to my flowers, and once I'm happy with the positioning, I use my art glitter glue to attach the little flowers to the wreath. The sentiment that I'm going to use was part of one of the pattern papers. I'm going to trim that down and then ink around the edge of it and mat that onto a piece of the same red cardstock that I used as my background layer. Once I've inked around the edge of that, I will then attach that to my card front, just sort of at the top of where the ornament is. The little bit of sparkle for this card comes from using the scrapbook.com pops of colours. This one is called Glitter Champagne, and I'm just adding a little daub to the centre of each one of those flowers. Now the front panel is completely assembled, I'm going to use my art glitter glue to attach that to the front of my card base. So there we have card number 2, probably my favourite from this batch. On to card number 3, you'll see that I changed my mind on this card. So I'm going to start with a piece of pattern paper. I'm going to trim that down to 4 3/4 inches square. Then I'm going to trim down a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/2 inches square. To decorate this card, I'm going to use my Kaisercraft Christmas tree stencil, some Montmartre modelling paste, and some Spellbinders Sparkle Dust glitter. So I'm going to add the modelling paste through the stencil to that white panel, and then while it's still wet, I'm going to sprinkle the glitter dust over the top. I use my Prima distressing tool to distress the edges of the pattern paper and the white cardstock, and then I use my black ink cube to ink around the edge just to help look with that distressed look. I add a piece of sticky back craft foam to the back of my pattern paper. Then I use double-sided tape to attach my white panel on top of my pattern paper panel. Then that whole assembly is attached to the front of my card base. I'm not happy with the card as it is at the moment, so I'm trying to think of different ways to add some colour to the front without overdoing it. So I get my Uniball micro pen and draw a double scribbly border around the outside of the white cardstock. I'm still not that happy with the front, but I'm going to move on. I'm going to use these basil rub-ons. I'm going to rub on the words onto some white cardstock, and then I'm going to trim them down to size and mount them onto some of the same pattern paper that I've used on the background of my card base. I've added a piece of the sticky back foam to each of those sentiment sections, and now I'm going to attach them to my card front, one on either side of the Christmas tree. I'm still not happy with the look of the front of the card. That white Christmas tree is not standing out enough for my likings, but in an effort to add a little more colour to the front, I used the same pen that I used on the white cardstock to draw a border around my sentiments. The lack of colour got to me in the end, so I put the stencil back over the top of my Christmas tree and used my scrapbook.com pop of colour in the glitter champagne to go over the stencil again and give that more colour. It was a little bit tricky holding that stencil down over the greeting, but I did manage to do it, and I did make a little bit of a mess, but I was able to clean that up with the little pointy tool. So now that it has more colour, I am much more happy with the finished product. So there we have my 3 cards for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching my video. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel, and if you click that bell next to the subscribe button, you'll be notified each time I upload a new video. So once again, thank you for joining me here today, and I hope that you can join me for my next video.